Welcome to a Rise and Shine podcast. My name is Sherry Burgraff, and I'm an overcomer of ritual abuse, mind control, and trafficking. Today, I want to talk to you about a subject that's very close to my heart. Freedom of speech is under attack. A fearless Florida-based Substack journalist named GoEl runs investigations in ritual abuse. He stands for survivors and is exposing the corruption in the LDS Church in Utah. Now, he's standing and fighting the battle of his life under a stalking injunction, facing a $30,000 fine and up to 60 days in jail for talking and sharing the truth. There are survivors who have, like myself, who have been horribly abused, ritual abuse, trafficking, mind control. And these people that he's been sharing about have been hurt specifically by the LDS Church in Utah. Mostly, this is where it's coming out of. Back to GoEl's specific case. Joe and Lee Benyon of Utah were named online. And then, in July 2024, they filed a civil stalking injunction against Darcy, GoEl's real name, legal name. And then in January 2025, Judge Skanchy made it a permanent thing. And he ruled that any posting, location shares, and incitements met Utah's stalking standard for reporting the truth. Since when is stalking? What GoEl is facing is not for threats or contact, but for his speech and investigative work. But here's what's really at stake. As a survivor, I want to be crystal clear. This stalking order against an investigative journalist means that any journalist or anyone that stands up for survivors or survivors themselves who share their story publicly could now be charged with stalking simply for talking about someone online. Not to someone, but about someone. What does this mean? Reporting, sharing stories, investigative writing now can qualify as a stalking if the alleged target feels emotional distress. You don't have to call or show up in person. You can be labeled a stalker under Utah law simply by talking about someone online. I thought stalking orders required like direct contact, calling someone, following them, showing up at their home. And even then, just like my experience, when a woman has a restraining order, like I did with my first husband, unfortunately, some of us know how well that can work and how well they can protect us. So here I was having a court-mediated interaction with him, my ex now, when I was going through the divorce. And I insisted it be a public place because I knew him, in a public parking lot. So after the meeting, he followed me on foot to my car. And as I'm telling him to stop and that I would press charges for violating the restraining order, he then gets in his car and follows me in my car. So what do? I go to the police station. And even then, he followed me into the police station. And even though I told them I had a restraining order on him and he's right behind me and he's closer than 50 feet, they nicely asked him to leave. And they didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't tell me what I could do as far as him violating the restraining order. And I didn't know this at the time, but later I found out when I was remembering my cultic ritual abuse. The Manchester, Iowa chief of police, allegedly, was involved in the cultic criminal network that I was getting out of. So, anyway, it just drives home the fact that the injustice and backwards priorities of the system. So, fast forward 35 years later, now the system says talking about someone is stalking. What happened to freedom of speech? Since when did investigative reporting or investigative journaling in this instance become stalking merely for talking about someone and reporting on abuse in institutions like the LDS Church or like the Catholic Church that I was a part of? Here's why it matters to me personally. I was abused in Dubuque, Iowa, in the Catholic Church by Father Terrance and Sister Mary Emily. As an adult, after having these memories, I told the Diocese of Dubuque about it. I reported it to them, and they did nothing about it. They said that they had no jurisdiction under the area of the Franciscan priests and nuns, which they were a part of. Now, here's the thing. Many of the survivors from the LDS Church told someone in the church about their abuse, and they allegedly did nothing. Any of us can become stalkers now if we talk, or someone mentions, like GoEl did, about someone or something that's going on, or anyone else connected with someone else that talks. But here's the deeper truth. When a survivor shares their story, it's treated as an unverified claim of ritual abuse unless it's proven in court. When multiple survivors come forward naming the same abuser without even knowing each other, that pattern gives some weight to their stories. And it's not a story, it's the truth. Even if no case is ever won, and these things are rarely prosecuted because, let's face it, trafficking alone is a multi-billion-dollar a year business, so they do a lot of things to cover that up. Often legal and institutional systems are corrupt, and abusers use everything that they can to cover it up and to keep victims from talking and to silence them. As a survivor, overcomer myself from multi-generational harm and illicit governmental mind control experience, I know the horror of coming out of that torture and terror, being trafficked and being silenced. That's why GoEl's work means and matters so deeply to me. I know how these networks silence our voices with whatever they have at their disposal and with whoever they have at their disposal. And so the crimes that are committed is actually protected by the system, the network that's in place, and the criminals go unpunished. And we, meaning survivors and journalists like GoEl, become criminals for talking about the crimes that are done to us and to others. This is why I fight. This is why I stand with GoEl in his fight to expose systemic ritual abuse, not just in Utah, but worldwide. I see this injunction as pure lawfare, a legal weapon aimed at legally hiding the truth and trying to intimidate journalists and others like him that stand and talk about the truth and try to scare survivors into silence by using that as an example. See what's going to happen if you talk. I also know that this is a spiritual battle, and I've been in much prayer for GoEl and his family. And also, I'll leave a link in the description of Alexia and Jason Preston of We Are the People podcast. They also have a civil suit against them, and they are in Utah. And it's because they're talking and exposing this. Here's the call to action. I'm asking you to pray for GoEl, for his family, for Jason, for Alexia, and all the other people that are standing up and talking about what's really happening, and all the survivors. That God protects GoEl and his family just as he protected Daniel in the lion's den, for the legal protection that he needs, granting him the courage to keep going and continue to do what he's been called to do, to clear his name. I also pray for justice in the court, that he doesn't have to pay any fines or face any jail time, and that the guilty parties will be prosecuted. If justice isn't done here on earth for those who torture, rape, and traffic innocent children, there will be justice. And I leave that all in God's hands. I also pray for freedom of speech, for journalists and survivors whose voices are endangered by this precedent, for lies to be exposed, and for God to shut the mouth of the true enemy, Satan. I've also been praying that God would push back the powers of darkness, and I've been praying that for 8 or 9 years. And look what's happening in Utah. Look what's happening around the world. Survivors are coming forward. There's tons of podcasts. And when enough people stand for what's right and stand for truth, those people that are hiding and covering this all up, we become a threat to them. Not as a revengeful kind of a thing, but it's like God's calling an army of people that have, and he uses people. So please pray for the exposure of these hidden institutions. Pray for Jason, Alexia, GoEl. And also, I'm going to share a link in the description to GoEl's Substack. And just share this video, like and subscribe. Stand for truth. Be willing to, once you know these things, how can you not do something? Even if it's to pray, share this video. This is a fight. I know it's a spiritual battle, but it's also a sacred fight for the lives of survivors, a fight for truth, for justice, reclaiming voices and the lives of those that abusers have literally buried. This has been hidden too long, and it's time to arise and shine. God bless you, and thank you for listening.